My love is one alone, without her equal, more beautiful than all other women. Look, she is like the star goddess, rising at the beginning of a happy new year. Try to hear that line not in a museum, but whispered 3,000 years ago. It changes things, doesn't it? When we picture ancient Egypt, our minds instantly fill with grand, silent images, pyramids piercing the sky, golden masks of pharaohs, imposing stone gods. It's a world that feels monumental, distant, and strangely silent on matters of the heart. We don't often imagine a young person in the city of Thebes carefully inscribing these aching, passionate words onto a piece of papyrus, their heart spilling out in ink. But that is precisely the world we are about to step into. Today, we are pulling back the immense stone curtain of history to listen to the whispers that have survived the centuries. We are going on a journey into the surprisingly intimate, deeply emotional, and beautifully relatable world of Egyptian love poems. This is the truth about what love sounded like along the Nile, and it is a story that will utterly shatter the cold, stoic stereotype of this ancient civilization. Prepare to have everything you thought you knew about the ancient Egyptians turned on its head. These are not formal state hymns or dry religious texts. These are poems filled with the dizzying thrill of new attraction, the sweet agony of longing, the playful teasing between lovers, and the raw pain of a broken heart. They speak of stolen glances across a crowded room, of comparing a beloved's hair to the bluest lapis lazuli, of the physical ache of separation that feels as real today as it did then. This is a humanity we recognize instantly, a universal language of desire and affection that transcends the vast gulf of time. We will explore who was writing these breathtaking verses. Were they professional scribes, or were they ordinary people, from farmers to nobles, moved to put their feelings into words? We will uncover the themes that obsessed them. The power of a lover's voice, the beauty of a simple garden, the intoxicating effect of just being near the one you adore. This exploration is so much more than a literary analysis. It is a recovery of a lost emotional landscape. It is an invitation to connect with people not as dusty historical figures, but as individuals who laughed, loved, and longed just as we do. Their world was one of incredible cultural achievement and profound spiritual belief, and their poetry is the bridge that connects those grand ideals to the most personal human experiences. So, if you're ready to see ancient Egypt in a vibrant, new, and deeply human light, to discover a side of this civilization that your history textbook almost certainly skipped over, then you are in the right place. Let's begin this fascinating journey together and listen closely, for the voices from the past are about to speak, and what they have to say about love is truly unforgettable. To truly appreciate the world that gave birth to these intimate verses, we need to travel to a specific time and place, a golden age of Egyptian power and culture known as the New Kingdom. This era, spanning roughly from 1550 to 1070 BCE, was the glittering imperial age of the pharaohs. It was a time of unprecedented wealth and stability, when Egypt's borders stretched deep into Nubia in the south and across the Levant in the northeast. But this isn't just a story of military conquest and political might. This newfound security and prosperity created a unique social environment, a cultural hothouse where the arts and personal expression could flourish in ways they never had before. For the first time on such a scale, we see a society with the luxury to look inward, to explore the inner landscapes of the human heart, not just the outer demands of the state and the gods. This cultural zenith reached its peak during what historians call the Ramesside period, the dynasties ruled by the many pharaohs named Rameses. Think of the great Rameses II, with his colossal statues and the breathtaking temples of Abu, symbol monuments to power, yes, but also to a civilization confident enough in its own identity to explore the full spectrum of human experience. And at the heart of this world were cities like Thebes, the vibrant religious capital. Thebes was not a silent museum piece, it was a bustling, crowded metropolis. Picture the crowded streets, the grand temples of Karnak and Luxor with their endless columns reaching for the sky, the bustling markets, and the busy estates along the riverbank. It was within this dynamic, sophisticated urban setting that our love poems were born. They weren't composed in isolated caves or by a reclusive few. They were the product of a complex, literate, and socially nuanced society. The very existence of these poems tells us something profound. They required scribes who were educated, an audience that appreciated them, and a culture that valued this form of personal expression. This was a world with a leisure class, with nobles and officials who had the time and the education to commission or compose such works. It suggests a society that understood the value of beauty for its own sake, of art that served no immediate practical or religious purpose other than to articulate the most powerful of human emotions. This is a crucial point to grasp. The people who wrote, shared, and listened to these poems were not primitive or emotionally simple. They were part of a highly advanced civilization that had developed a written language capable of extraordinary subtlety and nuance. They lived in a world filled with art, music, and ritual, a world that understood metaphor, symbolism, and the power of a well-turned phrase. The emotional complexity we find in their love songs, the playful teasing, the deep longing, the celebration of physical beauty, is a direct reflection of their cultural sophistication. They had moved beyond the mere struggles of survival to ask deeper questions about life, meaning, and connection. So when we read a line like, "My heart flutters hastily when I think of my love for you," we are not hearing a primitive utterance. We are hearing the voice of a person from a society every bit as complex and emotionally intelligent as our own. A voice that simply found its moment to speak during a unique and flourishing chapter of human history. So where do these intimate whispers of the heart actually come from? How did they survive 3,000 years to reach us today? The answer lies not in towering monuments, but in fragile, delicate pages preserved by the desert itself. Our main windows into this world of ancient romance are a handful of incredible papyrus documents, most notably the Chester Beatty Papyrus one, now housed in the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin, and the Turin Papyrus residing in the Egyptian Museum in Turin, Italy. The story of their discovery is as fascinating as the poems they contain. These papyri weren't found in royal tombs like Tutankhamun's. They were often recovered from the sands near the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina, the community of the very artisans who built and decorated the Pharaohs' tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Imagine the irony. The people who spent their lives creating eternal resting places for gods on earth were the same community that produced and cherished these profoundly human, personal works of art. These manuscripts were discovered by archaeologists in the early 20th century, often in fragments, their precious texts hidden away for millennia. The dry, arid climate of Egypt acted as a perfect natural preservative. Papyrus, a paper-like material made from the pith of the papyrus plant, is incredibly perishable in damp conditions, but in the relentless desert heat, it can become as brittle and durable as old leather, allowing the ink to remain stunningly legible. It's a small miracle of preservation that these delicate pages endured wars, the rise and fall of empires, and the slow passage of centuries, just waiting to be read again. And what makes them so special is their format. These were not grand, formal inscriptions chiseled for eternity into temple walls for public display. They are informal collections, meticulously copied by scribes onto scrolls. The Chester Beatty Papyrus, for instance, is an anthology, a collection of multiple love songs grouped together. This format strongly suggests they were personal treasured items, something akin to a beautiful notebook of favorite poems, or perhaps even a scribe's master copy for recitation. This gives them an undeniable authenticity and an intimate feel that official state records completely lack. You get the sense that these were texts meant to be enjoyed privately, read aloud in a garden, or shared between lovers. They are filled with the raw, unvarnished emotions of everyday life, captured not for the gods or the pharaoh, but for the human heart. This very informality is what makes them so powerful and so relatable. They are a direct line to the personal tastes, the private joys, and the secret longings of the ancient Egyptians, a quiet counterpoint to the bombastic official narrative of power and divinity that usually dominates the historical record. Now, to truly hear these voices, we need to understand the very medium they used to speak, the language itself. These poems were composed in a form of Middle Egyptian, which was the classical literary language of the New Kingdom, much like Shakespearean English is to us today. It was a language of sophistication and art, chosen deliberately for its rich vocabulary and expressive potential. But here's a detail that brings these works to life. They were almost never written in the formal, pictorial hieroglyphs we see carved on temple walls. Instead, scribes used a flowing, cursive script called hieratic, which was essentially the everyday handwriting of ancient Egypt. Picture a scribe not painstakingly chiseling a stone monument, but sitting with a reed brush and ink, his hand moving quickly and fluidly across a sheet of papyrus. This hieratic script was practical and fast, a tool for administration, letters, and literature. The fact that these love poems were written in this informal script reinforces their personal, intimate nature. They were part of the living, breathing world of daily life, not the frozen world of eternal monuments. This choice of medium already tells us that emotion and immediacy were more important than formal permanence. Yet, this beautiful, flowing script presents one of the greatest challenges for modern scholars, because capturing the true essence of these poems in translation is an art form in itself. The original Egyptian language is packed with wordplay, double meanings, and a rhythmic cadence that is incredibly difficult to carry over into modern languages like English. A single word might have a literal meaning related to the body, but also a deeper, metaphorical meaning connected to spiritual concepts or the natural world. Translators aren't just looking for the dictionary definition of a word, they are trying to hear the music behind it. They have to make difficult choices. For instance, do they prioritize the literal meaning and risk losing the poetic flow? Or do they focus on recreating the rhythm and in the process sacrifice a subtle pun or a cultural reference? It's a delicate balancing act. Consider a simple phrase like describing a lover's hair. The original might use a term that directly translates to the night of her hair, evoking a sense of darkness, depth, and mystery. A translator must decide whether to render that directly, which might sound strange to our ears, or to find an equivalent metaphor like her hair is like the deepest night, which captures the feeling but changes the original's concise power. This is why you can find several different English versions of the same ancient poem, each one a valid interpretation, but each one highlighting a different facet of the original text. The work of these scholars is a kind of archaeological dig into language itself, carefully brushing away the dust of centuries to uncover the lyrical heart of the verse. They have to be part linguist, part poet, and part cultural historian all at once. So when we read an English translation of an Egyptian love poem, we are experiencing a magnificent reconstruction, a best effort echo of a voice from the past. We are hearing the essence of the emotion, even if the specific musicality of the original syllables is, in some ways, lost to time. This incredible effort allows us to appreciate not just the feelings expressed, but the immense skill and artistry of the original scribes who so perfectly married form and feeling in their flowing hieratic script. Now, let's step inside the poems themselves and listen to what they are actually saying. The first overwhelming theme that echoes across these 3,000-year-old pages is one of intense, almost painful longing and desire. This isn't a polite, courtly admiration. It's a raw, physical, and deeply visceral yearning that any person who has ever been in love will recognize in an instant. The poets of the Nile had a genius for capturing this ache, often using metaphors drawn directly from their own world, from nature, from the body, from the simple sensory experiences of daily life, to express feelings that were anything but simple. One of the most famous examples comes from a poem in the Chester Beatty papyrus, where a young man, utterly captivated, declares of his beloved, "The sight of her is like pomegranate wine." Think about that for a moment. In a hot, arid climate, what could be more refreshing, more life-giving, more intoxicating than a cool, deep red drink made from the sweetest fruit? Her very presence, the mere act of seeing her, is compared to a substance that quenches a profound thirst and brings a delightful dizziness. It's a metaphor that operates on multiple levels at once. It speaks to visual beauty, to taste, to physical sensation, and to an altered state of being. He isn't just saying she's pretty, he's saying her existence is a vital nourishment and a blissful intoxication that he craves. This sense of desperate, overwhelmed need is expressed even more directly in another stunning passage, where a lover describes the physical effect of their desire. The poem says, "My heart is not still in my body like a trapped bird in a net. Can you feel the frantic, panicked fluttering?" The ancient Egyptians believed the heart was the seat of emotion, thought, and memory, and here it's portrayed as a wild creature, snared and struggling, completely out of the individual's control. This isn't a calm, rational affection. It's a consuming passion that has taken over their entire being, making them a prisoner to their own emotions. The imagery is so powerful because it's so universal. Even if we've never seen a bird caught in a net, we understand the feeling of a heart beating out of our chest, of emotions so strong they feel like a physical force we cannot contain. This raw vulnerability is a thread that runs throughout the collection. Another poet confesses, "I am like a man in the underworld when his love is distant from him." In a culture so focused on the afterlife and the perilous journey through the darkness of the underworld, this was perhaps the strongest analogy they could possibly use. To be separated from the one you love isn't just sadness. It's a kind of death, a state of shadowy existence where true life only returns when the beloved is near again. What is perhaps most striking is how these ancient writers blend this raw, almost desperate yearning with a breathtaking appreciation for physical beauty. They don't shy away from describing the body in vivid, celebratory detail. One poem lovingly catalogues a woman's features, saying her hair is the deep blue of lapis lazuli, her arms more brilliant than gold, her fingers like lotus buds, and her breasts, well, the poet says they are perfectly formed. This isn't a crude or objectifying list. It's a reverent, almost awe-struck enumeration, comparing each part of her to the most precious and beautiful materials in their world: gold, gemstones, and the sacred lotus flower. She is, in essence, a living work of art crafted from the finest elements of creation. This combination of deep emotional longing and frank physical admiration is what makes these poems feel so modern and so true. They understood that love is not just a spiritual connection or a polite social arrangement. It is a force that involves the entire self, the racing heart, the captivated eye, the yearning soul. They give us a complete picture of infatuation and desire, one that is both beautifully poetic and unflinchingly honest. They weren't afraid to say, "My heart longs for your love," or to admit, "I am possessed by love for you." In these confessions, the stone statues of the pharaohs completely fade away, and we are left with the voice of a human being, speaking a truth that time cannot erase. But if longing and desire represent one powerful current in these poems, another flows just as strongly, and that is the sheer, unadulterated joy of celebrating the beloved's beauty. The ancient Egyptian poets were masters of the art of the compliment, and they crafted their praises with a level of detail and reverence that transforms simple physical description into something approaching a sacred act. They didn't just say someone was beautiful, they constructed intricate verbal portraits, comparing each feature to the most exquisite and meaningful elements of their natural and cultural world. Take the description of hair, for instance. In one poem, a young woman's hair is described as the color of the night sky, or more specifically, as being like the deep blue of lapis lazuli. This wasn't just a random color comparison. Lapis lazuli was one of the most prized and expensive materials in the ancient world, imported from far-off Afghanistan. It was used in the finest jewelry, in the inlay on royal funeral masks, and in the eyes of sacred statues. To compare a woman's hair to this stone was to say it was not merely dark, but precious, divine, and radiant with a cosmic significance. It was to place her on a level with the gods themselves. This practice of using nature as a mirror for human beauty extends to nearly every feature. Eyes were not simply bright. They were like the eyes of a gazelle, an animal admired for its grace and gentle alertness. A slender neck might be compared to the elegant curve of a sycamore fig, a tree that provided both shade and sustenance, making the comparison one of both beauty and life-giving grace. Hands were not just pretty, they were like lotus buds about to unfurl. The lotus flower was a potent symbol in Egyptian mythology, representing creation, rebirth, and the sun itself, as it closed at night and emerged anew from the watery depths each morning. To see a lover's hand in that form was to see it as an instrument of creation and new beginnings. This wasn't a checklist of attractive parts. It was a holistic vision where every aspect of the beloved reflected the order, beauty, and sacredness of the cosmos. This way of seeing reveals a profound cultural mindset. For the ancient Egyptians, the boundary between the human and the divine was far more porous than it is for many of us today. Gods could take human form, and pharaohs were considered living gods. By describing a beloved woman or man using the same language and imagery reserved for deities and the natural world, the poets were essentially elevating them to a similar status. They were seeing the divine spark within the human form. When a poet writes, "Her breasts are perfectly formed," the statement is made with the same reverence an artist might use when crafting a statue of the goddess Hathor, the very embodiment of love, beauty, and motherhood. The physical form was not something to be hidden or spoken of in hushed tones. It was a glorious manifestation of life, a gift from the gods to be admired, celebrated, and honored through poetry. We see this beautifully in a poem where a young man describes watching his beloved approach. He says, "When she steps into the street, the air is filled with the scent of myrrh." Myrrh was an incredibly valuable resin used in incense for temples and in the embalming process for the journey to the afterlife. It was a scent associated with the sacred and the eternal. For her very presence to perfume the common space of the street with this aroma is to say that her passage transforms the ordinary world into a hallowed place. She brings a touch of the divine with her wherever she goes. This is the ultimate function of these elaborate similes. They are not just flattery, they are a way of mapping the entire known universe from the precious stones of the earth to the celestial bodies in the sky onto the person who is the center of the poet's world. It is a way of saying, "In you I see everything that is beautiful, ordered, and holy." This celebratory theme provides a beautiful counterbalance to the ache of longing. It captures those moments of pure, blissful admiration when the lover is simply present, captivated by the miracle of the beloved's existence, and feeling compelled to create a verbal monument to that beauty, a monument that, thanks to papyrus and the desert sands, has lasted far longer than any statue of stone. This deep connection between emotion and the environment extends far beyond simple comparisons of hair to gemstones or hands to flowers. The ancient Egyptian poets didn't just borrow isolated images from nature. They built entire emotional landscapes, using the world around them as a vast, living stage upon which the drama of love unfolded. The Nile River, the very lifeblood of their civilization, frequently appears not just as a setting, but as an active participant in the narrative of love. Its predictable, life-giving floods that nourished the fields became a powerful metaphor for the overwhelming, fertile power of desire itself. In one poem, a lover declares, The flood is great, the crocodiles are in the shallows, yet I go into the water for my love. This is a breathtakingly dangerous image. The annual Nile flood was a force of both creation and destruction, and crocodiles were genuine, ever-present threats. To say you would brave these perils for your beloved is to express a love that is reckless, all-consuming, and more powerful than the instinct for self-preservation. The natural world here isn't a passive backdrop. It's a test, an obstacle that only serves to prove the intensity of one's feelings. Gardens held a particularly special place in this symbolic landscape. In a land dominated by vast, arid deserts, a cultivated garden with its shady trees, tranquil ponds, and fragrant flowers was a true oasis, a contained paradise of order and beauty. It's no surprise, then, that these gardens become the ultimate symbol of fulfilled and mutual love. The poems often depict lovers meeting in these secluded, idyllic spaces. One verse beautifully sets the scene. The voice of the dove is calling. It says, "It's dawn, where will you go? But I am with my love in a garden, and my heart is blissful." Here, the garden is a private universe, a sanctuary where time seems to stand still, and the outside world, represented by the calling dove marking the dawn, becomes an irrelevant intrusion. The garden is a physical manifestation of the lovers' shared happiness, a place of harmony, abundance, and sensual pleasure, where their love can bloom as freely as the flowers around them. Conversely, when love is unrequited or separation occurs, this same natural world turns hostile and barren. A lover pining for their beloved might describe themselves as being in a waterless place, or their heart as a field that has been stripped. The imagery of a dry, cracked field, desperately waiting for the nourishing flood that never comes, is a poignant and visceral metaphor for emotional neglect and longing. The once lush garden of their heart has withered in the absence of the beloved's presence. This intricate weaving of human emotion and the natural environment reveals a worldview that feels strikingly modern, even ecological. The ancient Egyptians saw no hard separation between their inner emotional states and the outer physical world. They understood themselves to be part of a single, interconnected system. A happy heart could make the garden seem more vibrant, and a barren landscape could accurately reflect a desolate soul. This is a concept known as the pathetic fallacy in literature, where nature mirrors human feelings, but for the Egyptians it was likely more than a literary device. It was a genuine philosophical and spiritual perspective. Their entire cosmology was based on cycles of nature, the daily death and rebirth of the sun god Ra, the annual flood and recession of the Nile, the seasonal growth and decay of plants. It was only natural that they would map these fundamental, life-sustaining cycles onto the most powerful human experiences, like love and loss. The blossoming of a lotus flower at dawn wasn't just a pretty sight, it was a daily miracle of rebirth, a perfect symbol for the rejuvenating power of a lover's smile. The migratory patterns of birds returning season after season could echo the faithful, recurring thoughts of a distant beloved. This perspective allowed for an incredible richness of expression. Consider how they used different trees. The sturdy, fruitful sycamore fig, which provided both shade and sustenance, was often associated with protective, nurturing love, sometimes even being called the tree of life. A lover might wish to sit with their beloved beneath its branches, finding both physical comfort and emotional shelter. In contrast, the fragile, swaying Persea tree might be used to describe a heart fluttering with nervous anticipation. Even the animal kingdom played its part. The cat, sacred to the goddess Bastet, symbolized grace, affection, and playful sensuality. Fish in the river could represent fertility and the teeming, joyful possibilities of life, while a lone bird flying across the sky might perfectly capture the feeling of solitude and yearning for a distant partner. This entire symbolic language shows a people who are profoundly observant of their environment and who found in its every detail a resonant echo of their own most intimate feelings. They didn't see a world of inert objects to be conquered, but a living, breathing companion to the human journey, a source of constant metaphor and meaning that gave their most personal emotions a cosmic significance. Perhaps one of the most revolutionary aspects of these poems is the simple, powerful fact that the voices we hear are not only male. A significant number of these songs are written from a woman's perspective, and she is not a silent, demure object of admiration. She is the subject of her own story, possessing her own fierce desires, her own wit, and her own undeniable agency. In the Chester Beatty papyrus, we hear a young woman's voice, clear and confident, as she declares her intentions. "I will go to my beloved that I may see his love with my own eyes. What my heart tells me to do, I will do for him." This is not passive waiting, this is a statement of action. Her heart commands her, and she obeys its call, taking ownership of her pursuit. In another poem, a woman speaks of her lover with a playful, almost boastful pride, saying, "My brother's love is on the far shore, a stretch of water divides us, and a crocodile waits on the sandbank. Yet I enter the water, I brave the waves, my heart is strong on the deep." The brother here is a term of endearment for a lover, and her declaration is one of incredible courage. She is the hero of this narrative, willingly facing down a literal monster, the ever-present danger of the crocodile, to reach the man she desires. Her heart is not fluttering weakly, it is strong on the deep, a powerful engine driving her through peril. This active female voice profoundly challenges the stereotypical image of the cloistered, submissive ancient Egyptian woman. It suggests a social reality where women, at least in certain contexts and classes, could express their sexuality and their emotional needs with a surprising degree of freedom. These poems were almost certainly composed and written down by male scribes, as literacy was primarily a male profession. However, the deliberate choice to craft poems from a female point of view, and to do so with such authenticity and empathy, indicates that these male poets were not only capable of imagining a woman's inner world, but also saw value in giving it a powerful voice. It implies there was an audience, including women, who appreciated and identified with these expressions. The very existence of these poems opens up a fascinating debate among scholars. Were these female voices purely a male literary construction, a kind of ventriloquism? Or do they reflect, however indirectly, the actual conversations, songs, and laments of real women that were then polished and recorded by scribes? It is entirely plausible that these written works are the refined echoes of a vibrant oral tradition of folk songs and popular poetry, where women's voices were already prominent. A mother might have sung a love song to her daughter, or a group of young women might have chanted verses while working, their words and feelings eventually making their way to a scribe's attentive ear. What this almost certainly confirms is that there was a cultural space for the expression of female desire. The goddesses of the Egyptian pantheon themselves provided powerful models for such expression. Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and beauty, was a formidable and often uninhibited figure, celebrated for her sexuality and her joyful power. A woman expressing her longing could be seen as embodying the spirit of Hathor herself, aligning her personal feelings with a divine force. This religious and cultural backdrop made female desire not something shameful to be hidden, but a natural, potent part of the cosmic order. Furthermore, the content of these poems reveals a dynamic of mutual affection and playful competition between the sexes that feels remarkably balanced. In one delightful exchange, a young man and woman trade verses, each trying to out-compliment the other. He begins by calling her the most beautiful girl in the world. She fires back, "What's the good of your speech? You would have me kiss you before I have even embraced you." This is not a passive recipient of flattery. This is a sharp-witted participant in the game of love, teasing him for his haste and setting her own pace. It depicts a relationship where the woman has a voice, an opinion, and the confidence to express it. While we must be careful not to project modern ideals of equality onto an ancient patriarchal society, these poems undeniably reveal cracks in the monolithic facade of total male dominance. They show us a culture where the emotional lives of women were considered worthy of artistic celebration, where their desires were understood as a driving force of human connection, and where their voices, whether directly or through the pen of a scribe, could ring out with a clarity and passion that still resonates across 30 centuries. But these poems were not meant to be confined to the silent, private reading we often associate with poetry today. The very structure of the verses, with their strong, repetitive rhythms and recurring refrains, hints at a far more vibrant and communal existence. The evidence strongly suggests that these intimate confessions were not just read, but performed, quite possibly sung or chanted to the accompaniment of musical instruments like harps, lyres, sistrums, and tambourines. Imagine the scene for a moment. We are no longer looking at a solitary scribe hunched over a papyrus. We are in a spacious, open courtyard of a wealthy Theban estate as the evening cools. The air is scented with lotus blossoms and the smoky aroma of cooking fires. Guests are reclining on cushions, and in the center, a musician plucks a gentle, hypnotic melody on a slender, arched harp. Then a voice rises above the soft notes. A singer, perhaps a professional or even a member of the household, begins to chant the words we now read in silence. 7 days since I saw my sister, and sickness has crept over me. My heart is heavy within me. The refrain, I will lie down in my house and feign illness, might be repeated with the harp echoing the cadence of the longing, turning the private ache into a shared, cathartic experience for everyone present. This performance context completely transforms our understanding of the poetry's function. It moves the love song from the page into the realm of social ritual and entertainment. These gatherings, whether at a festive banquet, a family celebration, or a more intimate party, were key social events for the elite of the New Kingdom. Music and poetry were the centerpieces of such occasions, as tomb paintings vividly depict. We see images of harpists and flutists playing for groups of elegantly dressed men and women, who often hold lotus blossoms, the very symbol of rebirth and sensuality that peppers the poems themselves. The performance of love poetry in this setting served multiple purposes. It was sophisticated entertainment, certainly, but it also acted as a socially sanctioned space for the expression of powerful emotions. In a culture with strict social codes, the performance of a poem about desperate longing or the celebration of physical beauty could allow for the articulation of feelings that might be difficult to express in more formal, everyday interactions. It was a way to explore the landscape of desire within a safe, artistic, and communal framework. The linguistic structure of the poems themselves is the most compelling clue to their musical nature. Many of them are built around a clear, repetitive call and response format, or a consistent stanza structure with a recurring chorus. The Chester Beatty papyrus, for instance, groups its poems into cycles, each one labeled as the beginning of the songs of great entertainment. That title alone is a huge indicator. These were songs meant for entertainment. Within these cycles, you often find a structure where a stanza from a young man's perspective is followed directly by a stanza from the young woman's point of view, almost like a lyrical dialogue set to music. This back and forth would be perfectly suited for two singers, or for a single performer who changes their tone and posture to embody each lover in turn. The refrains are not just literary devices, they are hooks designed to be memorable and to invite audience participation, even if just in the form of internal resonance. The rhythm of the original Egyptian, with its structured stress patterns, would have naturally lent itself to a melodic line. While we will never know the exact tunes, we can look to the traditions of modern cultures in the region, where poetic recitation often blurs the line between speaking and singing, for a possible echo of this ancient practice. The poems were not static texts, they were living, breathing performances where the skilled interplay of voice and instrument could amplify the yearning in a line, heighten the joy in a compliment, and give physical form to the flutter of a heart compared to a trapped bird. This transforms our entire perception. These works are not merely the fossilized remains of emotion, They are the libretto for a lost concert, a sensory experience that engaged the ears with music, the mind with metaphor, and the heart with a shared, timeless humanity. To truly grasp the living, breathing reality of these ancient works, let's turn our attention to one of the most beautifully preserved collections, the Turin erotic papyrus, and examine a single, complete poem that perfectly encapsulates the playful, yearning spirit of the entire genre. This particular papyrus is a treasure, not just for its poetic content, but for its vivid illustrations that accompany the text, though our focus will be on the words that have echoed through time. The poem we're about to explore is a masterclass in narrative and character, telling the story of a young man's determined and slightly clumsy attempt to visit his beloved. It begins with his voice full of eager anticipation. He declares, "I passed by her house in the dark. I found her door standing open. My brother, my love, was standing there beside his mother, and all his siblings were with him." Right away, the poet establishes a scene so relatable it could be from any century. The open door is an invitation, a tantalizing opportunity, but the situation is immediately complicated. His beloved isn't alone, she's surrounded by her family. The term brother here is crucial. It's a common term of endearment for a lover, signifying closeness and affection, not a literal sibling. This creates an intimate, confidential tone, as if we're being let in on a secret. The young man's plan, however, quickly meets an obstacle. He continues, "Love of her captures my heart. Should I not go in because of the neighbors? The river is the same for the crocodile, they will say. The woman whose door was open, a young man entered to her." Here, we see the powerful internal conflict between his burning desire and the rigid constraints of social propriety. He is paralyzed by the fear of gossip, of what the neighbors will say. The metaphor he uses is brilliantly telling. The river is the same for the crocodile. It means that the danger is ever present and universal. Everyone faces the risk of social judgment, just as everyone who enters the Nile risks the crocodile. His passion is a force as powerful and perilous as the great river itself. This isn't just a simple love poem. It's a nuanced exploration of social anxiety, where the desire for a private moment clashes violently with the reality of living in a close-knit, watchful community. Then the poem shifts and we hear her voice. This is where the piece truly comes alive. The young woman responds not with shyness, but with a confident, almost teasing challenge. She says to him, "My heart is happy when I think of your love, but my wish is to control myself. I will go to the stable for the calves, and I will do for you what you desire, because I know you will not betray me." Her response is a stunning display of agency. She acknowledges her own happiness and desire, but she also asserts her own will. "My wish is to control myself." She isn't being coy, she is being strategic and mindful of her reputation. She proposes a solution, a more discreet meeting place, the stable for the calves. This is a brilliant narrative turn. The stable is a private, functional space away from the prying eyes of the family and neighbors in the main house. It's a realistic, practical solution to their dilemma, showing that she is just as invested in their rendezvous as he is, but perhaps more clever about orchestrating it. The dialogue continues, building this delightful dynamic of mutual affection and playful negotiation. He pleads, "Let your orders be given to the servant. I am headed for the festival, and I will do all that you have said." He is eager to comply, to follow her lead. Her final lines in the exchange are a masterpiece of affectionate command and reassurance. She tells him how good it is to go to the festival. "Put myrrh on your head, dress in fine linen, anoint yourself with the true wonders of the gods." She is essentially telling him how to present himself, to be his best self for their meeting, and then she delivers the closing, powerful line, "While the rascal is away, we shall be happy. I will lie with you, and you will show me your love. It is good for you to be here for me." The word translated as rascal is thought to refer to a watchful family member or perhaps even a rival, the very embodiment of the social obstacle. Her promise is direct and heartfelt. It is good for you to be here for me. This simple statement grounds the entire poem in a profound mutuality. It's not just about his desire for her, it is equally about her need for his presence. The structure of this poem, with its clear back and forth dialogue, makes it feel like a scene from a play. It has character development, conflict, and resolution. We see him anxious, passionate, and a bit overwhelmed by social pressure. We see her confident, witty, and in control of the situation, deftly navigating the path to their happiness. This single poem, pulled from the fragile pages of the Turin papyrus, gives us more than just beautiful imagery. It gives us a story. It reveals the ancient Egyptians not as monolithic figures carved in stone, but as individuals navigating the timeless, complicated, and wonderfully human dance of love, desire, and social expectation. While the Turin papyrus gives us a dramatic scene filled with social tension and clever dialogue, the Chester Beatty papyrus offers us a different kind of intimacy. It feels less like a performance for an audience and more like a direct line into the private, swirling thoughts of a lover, a collection so personal it could almost be a diary. This papyrus, another stunningly preserved document from the village of Deir el-Medina, contains an entire cycle of love songs, and within it we find poems that paint the experience of love with a different set of brushes, drawing their most powerful imagery not from the dangers of the river, but from the fertile, life-giving world of the farm and the garden. One of the most touching examples from this collection is a poem that masterfully uses agricultural metaphors to express a state of helpless, lovesick inertia. The speaker, utterly consumed by their affection, confesses, "I am like a field that has been stripped, a field that has been stripped of its hay." The repetition here is crucial. It's not just a statement, but a lament, a sigh of profound depletion. In an agricultural society utterly dependent on the harvest, this was a powerful analogy for personal crisis. A stripped field is barren, useless, and lifeless. It represents a complete loss of productivity and purpose. The poet is saying that love has rendered them incapable of functioning in their daily life. They continue, "My heart is heavy with longing for your love, and I cannot even put on my own clothes. I cannot even paint my own eyes." This is the human reality behind the agricultural metaphor. The physical act of dressing, the simple daily ritual of applying kohl eyeliner, a common practice for both men and women for both style and protection from the sun, has become an impossible task. The poem builds this sense of paralysis beautifully, concluding, "I am like a goose that is caught in a trap, and its voice is the sound of my longing." From the stripped field to the trapped bird, the imagery is consistently drawn from a world of rural toil and nature, creating a cohesive and deeply relatable portrait of someone who has been completely overtaken by emotion. This stands in fascinating contrast to the style of the Turin poems. While the Turin example we explored was a dialogue, a back-and-forth exchange that felt like a scene from a play, this Chester Beatty poem is a pure, unfiltered monologue. It's an inward gaze, a catalogue of internal sensations rather than an external conversation. The Turin poem was about action and negotiation. How do we get around these social obstacles to be together? This Chester Beatty poem is about inaction and pure feeling. "I am so overwhelmed by my love for you that I cannot move." This diversity is exactly what makes the genre so rich. It shows us that the ancient Egyptians were capable of exploring love from multiple angles, as a social game with rules to be navigated, and as an internal, psychological force that could bring all other activities to a complete standstill. The agricultural metaphor itself is a brilliant choice. For a civilization built on the predictable, life-giving cycle of the Nile's flood and the subsequent harvest, comparing a person to a fertile field was one of the highest compliments. In other poems, a beloved is called a field of lilies or a orchard of pomegranates, their body seen as a source of sustenance and beauty. But here, the metaphor is inverted to express the agony of absence. The speaker is the field, and without the beloved's presence, which acts like the nourishing flood, they have become barren and desolate. This use of a central, culturally vital concept to frame a personal emotion shows how deeply intertwined the Egyptians felt their inner lives to be with the outer, functioning world. What truly sets the Chester Beatty papyrus apart and fuels the idea of its diary-like nature is its structure and its palpable sense of a single collecting consciousness. The papyrus isn't just a random assortment of poems. It is organized into cycles, and these cycles are explicitly labeled the sayings of great happiness. This title itself suggests a personal anthology, a collection of things that bring the owner or compiler joy. It feels curated. As you move through the songs, you encounter a rotating cast of voices, sometimes a male speaker, sometimes a female, sometimes they refer to each other as brother and sister, other times as friend. Yet, despite these shifting perspectives, there is a remarkable consistency in the emotional tone and the quality of observation. It creates the impression that we are reading one person's collected favorites, a scrapbook of verses that all resonate with their own understanding of love. Perhaps this was a scribe's personal collection, a master copy of the songs that moved him most deeply. Or maybe it was commissioned by a wealthy individual for their own private enjoyment and reflection. The very act of compiling these intimate works into a single scroll is a deeply personal one. It's not a state document meant for wide dissemination. It's an object for contemplation, to be taken out and read in a quiet moment, each poem serving as a key to a different chamber of the heart. We see this intimate, reflective quality in another poem from the same papyrus, where the speaker finds solace in simply speaking their beloved's name. The verse begins, "I remember my beloved in my pain. My heart leaps swiftly when I think of his love for me." But then it takes a fascinating turn. The speaker says, "I have made my beloved's name my amulet." In ancient Egypt, names held immense power. To know the true name of a god or a person was to have a measure of control over them, and amulets were worn for protection and to channel specific powers. For the speaker to use the lover's name as a metaphysical shield is to say that the very thought of that person is what guards them from the ills of the world. It's an incredibly intimate and powerful concept. The poem continues, "When the watchmen patrol the city and find me alone, I will say my beloved's name, and by the knowledge of his love I shall be saved." This isn't about a physical meeting or a clandestine encounter in a stable. This is about the power of memory and invocation. The love exists as a sustaining force entirely within the speaker's mind and spirit, a private magic that provides comfort and courage during a lonely night. This level of introspective, almost philosophical reflection on the nature of love as an internal, protective force is a different shade of the emotional spectrum than the more narrative-driven Turin poem. It highlights the contemplative, personal nature of the Chester Beatty collection. Together, these two major papyri give us a stereo view of ancient Egyptian romance. From the Turin, we get the play, the social comedy, the witty exchange. From the Chester Beatty, we get the diary, the private meditation, the soulful confession. One shows us love as it is lived with others, and the other shows us love as it is felt within the silent, fertile fields of the self. But to fully understand the spiritual weight behind a line like, "I have made my beloved's name my amulet," we need to step into the temple and explore the profound connection between human affection and the divine. For the ancient Egyptians, love was never merely a secular affair. It was a force woven into the very fabric of the cosmos, a power embodied by specific, powerful deities who watched over the hearts of mortals. At the center of this divine love story stands Hathor, one of the most beloved and complex goddesses of the entire pantheon. She wasn't a distant, abstract figure. She was the goddess of love, music, beauty, dance, and drunken joy, the very essence of ecstatic celebration and sensual pleasure. She was often depicted as a cow, a symbol of nurturing motherhood, or as a beautiful woman wearing a headdress of cow horns with a sun disk, linking her directly to the life-giving power of the sun god Ra. When the poets of the New Kingdom composed their verses, they were operating within a world view where Hathor's presence was a tangible, accessible energy. To write about love was, in a very real sense, to invoke her spirit. This connection transforms our reading of the poems. When a young woman compares her hair to the deep blue of lapis lazuli, or a young man says the sight of his beloved is like pomegranate wine, they are doing more than just crafting a beautiful compliment. They are using the language of the temple. Lapis lazuli was the stone most sacred to Hathor, used in her statues and jewelry. Wine and beer were central to her rituals, substances that could lower inhibitions and bring worshippers closer to her joyful, uninhibited state. By describing their beloved with these terms, the poets were essentially seeing the goddess in the person they loved. They were sanctifying human attraction, viewing it as a manifestation of a divine principle. This is why the act of writing or reciting a love poem could feel like a religious act. It was a way to participate in Hathor's power, to channel a piece of her cosmic joy into their own lives. Her festivals were famously raucous affairs, filled with music, dancing, and the shaking of the sistrum, a sacred rattle that was her signature instrument. The very performance of these love songs, likely accompanied by harp and sistrum, would have directly echoed the soundscape of her worship, blurring the line between a worldly party and a religious celebration. The role of Hathor becomes even clearer when we look at another fascinating piece of evidence, the so-called harper's songs inscribed on tomb walls. These are not love poems per se, but they exist in the same cultural and spiritual ecosystem. In these tomb inscriptions, a blind harpist is often depicted singing to the tomb owner, offering a philosophical meditation on life and death. A famous example from the tomb of King Intef contains the lines, "Make holiday and do not weary of it. Lo, none is allowed to take his goods with him. Lo, none who departs comes back again." This might seem like simple carpe diem advice, but it is always performed under the patronage of Hathor, who is called the Mistress of the Vulva and the Lady of the Sycamore. She was a goddess deeply concerned with life, fertility, and the enjoyment of the present moment, precisely because she offered a hope for joy beyond the grave. She welcomed the deceased into the afterlife, providing solace and refreshment from a sycamore tree. This context reveals that the celebration of love, music, and beauty in the love poems was not seen as frivolous or opposed to spiritual concerns. It was part of a holistic philosophy that valued the pleasures of life as a sacred offering to the gods and as a necessary preparation for the journey through death. To love passionately in this life was to align yourself with the forces of creation and rebirth that Hathor represented. But the divine connection doesn't stop with Hathor. Invoking a god's name in a poem was a serious act, a way of tapping into that deity's specific power to bless and protect the relationship. We see this in a poem where a lover declares, "I will praise the Lady of Heaven, may she give you to me forever." The Lady of Heaven is a direct title for Hathor. This isn't a vague, poetic flourish, it is a direct prayer. The poet is actively seeking the goddess's intervention to make their love permanent. In another instance, a poem might casually mention the god Seth, a deity of chaos and storms, to represent the turbulent, overwhelming nature of desire. My heart is stormy, like the wind before a storm, like the chaos of Seth. By naming Seth, the poet isn't just making a comparison. They are acknowledging that the force of their passion shares a nature with a raw, elemental, and potentially destructive divine power. This practice of weaving the gods into the language of love elevated human emotion to a cosmic drama. A lover's quarrel wasn't just a personal disagreement. It could feel like the strife between the gods Horus and Seth. The joyful union of two people could be framed as a reflection of the sacred marriage between the earth god Geb and the sky goddess Nut. This symbolic layer gave everyday romantic experiences a profound sense of meaning and significance. A broken heart wasn't just bad luck, it was a state of divine disfavor or a temporary exile from the grace of Hathor. The successful pursuit of a beloved wasn't just personal triumph, it was a sign that the gods smiled upon the match. This intricate blending of the human and the divine is perhaps the most beautiful and distinctive feature of Egyptian love poetry. It allowed for a complete emotional expression where body and soul were not at odds. To admire a lover's physical form was to admire the handiwork of the gods. To feel the ache of longing was to feel a touch of the cosmic forces that govern the universe. The poems show us a culture that did not compartmentalize spirituality and sensuality, but saw them as two sides of the same sacred coin. When a poet writes, "Her embrace is like the field of offerings," he is comparing the act of holding his beloved to the sacred space of a temple altar, a place where heaven and earth meet. This is why these poems have endured. They are not just about fleeting human desire. They are about the human desire to connect our most personal, intimate experiences to something larger, more permanent, and more meaningful. They are about finding the divine in the curve of a smile, the sound of a laugh, or the comfort of an embrace, and in doing so, transforming earthly love into a glimpse of eternity. Who, then, were the actual people behind these intimate whispers? When we picture a young man in Thebes sighing over his beloved's lapis lazuli hair, or a young woman cleverly arranging a secret meeting in the stables, we are almost certainly glimpsing into the lives of the educated elite. The very existence of these poems, preserved on carefully inscribed papyri, points directly to a world of scribes, government officials, priests, and their families, the small, literate class that had both the education to write and the leisure to cultivate such refined artistic tastes. This was not a democratic art form accessible to every farmer or laborer along the Nile. Literacy was a specialized, powerful skill, painstakingly learned over years in scribble schools, and it was the key to administrative power and social advancement. The ability to compose such nuanced verses, filled with sophisticated metaphors and a deep understanding of literary conventions, marks the authors as part of this privileged, cultured circle. This isn't to say that the emotional experiences were exclusive to the upper class. The laborer in the field certainly felt the pangs of love just as acutely as the scribe in his villa. But the laborer did not have the means to have those feelings transcribed onto expensive papyrus by a trained professional. The poems we have are the refined, formalized expressions of that universal emotion, filtered through the lens of elite education and sensibility. Think of the reference materials required. The poets casually compare their beloveds to lapis lazuli, a gemstone imported from distant Afghanistan at great cost, or to gold and myrrh, substances of immense value. They speak of fine linen clothing, of gardens with ponds and sycamore trees, all markers of a life of comfort and status. The social anxiety expressed in the Turin poem, where the young man hesitates at the door for fear of what the neighbors will say, reflects the concerns of a community where reputation and social standing were paramount. This was a society with a highly developed sense of decorum, and the elite were constantly performing their status through their behavior, their dress, and their cultural consumption. The primary hub for this kind of literary activity was almost certainly the royal workmen's village of Deir el-Medina, the very place where the Chester Beatty and Turin papyri were found. This was not a typical village of farmers. It was a purpose-built, state-sponsored community housing the elite artisans and scribes responsible for constructing and decorating the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These were not common laborers. They were highly skilled, literate craftsmen, draftsmen, painters, sculptors who were paid well in rations and had significant downtime between official projects. In this unique environment, a vibrant literary culture flourished. The villagers kept extensive personal records, wrote letters, and engaged in legal disputes, all documented in writing. It is in this context that the love poems feel most at home. They were the private diversions of a sophisticated, close-knit community that valued artistic expression as part of a well-rounded life. A scribe might spend his morning meticulously inscribing religious texts for the pharaoh's eternal journey, and his evening composing a playful, sensual poem for his wife or sweetheart. This juxtaposition is crucial to understanding the Egyptian mind. Duty to the state and the gods coexisted seamlessly with the pursuit of personal joy and romantic fulfillment. What this reveals about the private lives of the Egyptian upper class is profoundly revealing. It shatters any lingering notion that their lives were solely dedicated to rigid duty, somber religion, and the glorification of the state. The existence of this corpus of love poetry proves that they cultivated a rich inner world and valued intellectual and emotional pleasure for its own sake. These poems were not instructional manuals or religious texts. They were entertainment, as their own titles declare. They were composed for banquets, for intimate gatherings, and for private reflection. This tells us that the Egyptian elite enjoyed a vibrant social life where wit, charm, and the ability to appreciate and perhaps even recite beautiful verse were admired qualities. The playful, competitive exchanges between lovers in the poems suggest a society where courtship involved verbal sparring and mutual appreciation, not just transactional arrangements. Furthermore, the prominent and active female voices in the poetry hint at the status of women within these elite circles. While Egypt was still a patriarchal society, women of the upper classes enjoyed more rights and freedoms than their counterparts in many other ancient civilizations. They could own and manage property, initiate divorce, and were active participants in economic life. The confident, assertive female speakers in the poems likely reflect, at least to some degree, the reality for educated women in these households. They were not invisible prisoners in the women's quarters. They were partners in the social and intellectual life of their class, with their own desires and the ability to express them, even if that expression was often channeled through the pen of a male scribe. The love poems, therefore, give us a priceless window into a side of ancient Egypt that the monumental architecture often obscures: the soft, human, and surprisingly modern world of private affection, intellectual play, and the universal, timeless pursuit of love. To understand just how special the Egyptian love poems truly are, we need to step back and place them on the wider map of the ancient world, seeing how they conversed with and stood apart from other great traditions of romantic verse. When we listen to the voices from the Nile and then turn our ears to the equally ancient and powerful voices from Greece and the Levant, the distinct Egyptian melody becomes beautifully clear. Consider the Song of Songs, a book of the Hebrew Bible also known as the Song of Solomon. Like the Egyptian works, it is a radiant celebration of physical love and longing, filled with similarly lush natural imagery. The beloved's hair is compared to a flock of goats streaming down a mountain, her cheeks to pomegranate halves, her stature to a palm tree. The shared use of this nature-based metaphorical language is striking, suggesting a common poetic vocabulary across the ancient Near East. But listen closely and a key difference emerges. While the Egyptian poems often feature a clear, alternating dialogue between a man and a woman, each with their own distinct and active voice, the Song of Songs is more fluid in its attribution. Scholars have long debated who is speaking and when, and the female voice, while passionate and beautiful, often exists within a frame that can feel more allegorical. For centuries, its primary interpretation within Judaism and Christianity was as an allegory for God's love for Israel or Christ's love for the Church. This is not to diminish its power as a human love poem, but it highlights a different cultural context. The Egyptian poems, in contrast, were never burdened with this level of theological interpretation. They were, from the moment they were penned, unapologetically and joyfully about human love for its own sake, free from the need to be a vehicle for divine metaphor. Their purpose was entertainment and personal expression, not religious allegory, and this gives them a unique, earthbound immediacy. Then, from the Aegean Sea, we hear the fragmented, haunting voice of the poet Sappho from the island of Lesbos. Writing a few centuries after the peak of New Kingdom poetry, Sappho's work shares with the Egyptians an intense focus on the personal and the emotional. She famously captures the physical, overwhelming symptoms of desire in a way that any Egyptian scribe would have understood. My heart hammers in my chest, and a subtle fire runs under my skin. This visceral, bodily reaction to love is a universal language spoken by both traditions. Yet, the social context was profoundly different. Sappho's poetry, much of which was composed for and performed within a close-knit community of women, offers a deeply personal, almost private lens on female homoerotic love and the dynamics of her circle. The Egyptian poems, while also personal, feel more integrated into mainstream, public, and heteronormative social entertainment. They were performed at mixed-gender banquets for the elite. Furthermore, while Sappho's voice is singular and towering, the Egyptian corpus gives us a chorus. We don't have a single, famous poet's name attached to these works. They feel more like a collective cultural expression. The Egyptian poems democratize the voice of love, presenting it not as the genius of one individual, but as the shared emotional language of an entire sophisticated culture. Two aspects in particular set the Egyptian tradition in a class of its own. The first is the remarkable equality of the voices we hear. As we've seen, the female voice in these poems is not a passive object of admiration. She is a witty negotiator, a brave adventurer wading through crocodile-infested metaphorical waters, and a confident director of her own romantic fate. This active female agency, presented so matter-of-factly and woven into the very fabric of the poetic dialogue, is something that stands out sharply in the ancient world. While other traditions certainly have powerful female figures, the back-and-forth balance and the mutual pursuit depicted in the Egyptian poems feel uniquely modern. The second, and perhaps most defining, feature is their profound and seamless integration with the natural world. For the Egyptians, the garden wasn't just a pretty place to meet, it was a symbolic manifestation of their love. The Nile flood wasn't just a dramatic metaphor, it was the literal, life-giving force of their civilization, making the comparison to overwhelming desire incredibly potent and immediate. Their entire cosmos, from the sycamore fig tree to the lotus blossom to the cycle of the sun, was alive with meaning that could be directly mapped onto human emotion. This wasn't just poetic ornamentation, it was a reflection of a worldview where humanity was an inseparable part of a sacred natural order. The lover's heart didn't just feel like a trapped bird. In a very real sense, it was a trapped bird, subject to the same natural forces that govern the entire universe. This comparative view doesn't seek to crown one tradition as superior, but rather to illuminate the unique qualities of each. The Song of Songs gives us love framed by divine covenant, its human passion echoing a greater spiritual drama. Sappho gives us the intense, intimate portrait of individual emotion and the complex dynamics of a private world. But the Egyptian love poems give us something different altogether, a vision of love as a public, shared, and celebrated social art. They show us a society that confidently embraced the joys of the human heart as a natural and vital part of a civilized life, a culture that saw no contradiction between building eternal monuments to the gods and composing tender, playful verses about a lover's smile. They offer us a window into a world where emotion and environment were one, where the divine was present in the personal, and where the voices of men and women could ring out with a mutual respect and passion that still feels revolutionary even after 3,000 years. This point about where we discovered these poems is absolutely crucial because it shatters one of the most persistent myths about ancient Egypt. When we think of Egyptian texts, our minds naturally drift to the dark, silent chambers of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, to the Book of the Dead with its spells to navigate the perils of the afterlife. It's an easy assumption to make that any writing from this civilization must be solemn, religious, and focused on death. But the love poems we've been exploring stand in brilliant, defiant opposition to that idea. They were not found entombed with mummies placed there to comfort the dead in the world to come. they are overwhelmingly, emphatically from secular contexts. The Chester Beatty and Turin papyri were recovered from the sands near a living, breathing community, the village of Deir el-Medina. They were the personal possessions of the workmen and scribes, items for daily life and enjoyment. These were documents stored in a home, carried in a bag, read aloud among friends in the light of the day, not hidden away in a burial chamber for eternity. This distinction is not a minor archaeological detail. It fundamentally changes how we understand the Egyptian people. The existence of this vibrant, secular love poetry proves that their culture was not singularly obsessed with death and the afterlife. It was a culture equally and passionately invested in the joys, the complexities, and the sheer exhilaration of being alive. They built monuments for the dead, yes, but they composed poetry for the living. This was a society that understood the concept of carpe diem, seized the day long before the Romans ever coined the phrase. The evidence for this is right there in the poems themselves. They are filled with an urgent, present-tense desire. "I passed by her house in the dark," a poet says, describing a specific, risky nighttime adventure. The voice of the dove is calling. It says, "It's dawn." Another observes, grounding us firmly in a specific, fleeting moment in time. The entire narrative of the young couple arranging a secret meeting in the stable is a story about navigating the social realities of the present world with its gossiping neighbors and watchful families. There is no mention of Osiris, no prayer for a favorable judgment in the Hall of Truth, no concern for the soul's journey after death. The entire focus is on the immediate, physical, and emotional reality of human connection. This creates a beautiful and necessary balance in our perception of their worldview. The Egyptians were famously meticulous about preparing for the afterlife, but these poems reveal they were just as meticulous about savoring the one they were in. Think of it this way: the tomb and its spells were about ensuring eternal life, a continuation of existence. But the love poem was about celebrating the peak of what that existence could offer right now. It was about the quality of life, not just its quantity in the hereafter. The two pursuits were not contradictory, they were complementary parts of a whole philosophy. A well-lived life filled with love, beauty, and pleasure was the best possible preparation for whatever came next. This is why the goddess Hathor was so important. She presided over both realms. She was a goddess of love and music for the living, and she was also the Lady of the West who welcomed the deceased into the afterlife, offering them refreshment and solace. By engaging in the joyful, sensual world that Hathor represented through poetry and music, the Egyptians were aligning themselves with a force that blessed both this life and the next. Understanding this completely reframes the people behind the poems. They were not a somber, death-obsessed cult marching stoically toward the grave. They were individuals who knew how to laugh, to flirt, to feel their hearts race with nervous anticipation, and to ache with loneliness. They valued wit in conversation, the beauty of a well-tended garden, and the profound comfort of a private embrace. The love poems are our clearest window into this vibrant, lived experience. They show us that for the ancient Egyptian elite, a successful life was measured not only by a well-provisioned tomb, but also by a heart full of cherished memories, by the sound of a lover's laughter, and by the exquisite pain and pleasure of a love that felt, in the moment, more powerful than death itself. This recalibration is perhaps the greatest gift these 3,000-year-old verses give us. They return the warmth of life to a civilization we have too often viewed through a funerary lens, allowing us to see them not as figures preparing for death, but as people who were, above all else, passionately, joyfully, and completely alive. But to truly appreciate the journey these words have taken to reach us, we must thank the most vital and yet often overlooked figures in this entire story, the scribes of ancient Egypt. These were the artists and archivists who transformed fleeting emotion into permanent ink, the essential bridge between the human heart and the historical record. A scribe was far more than a simple copyist. He was a member of a highly educated, elite profession, the backbone of the Egyptian bureaucracy. His training began in youth, a long and arduous apprenticeship in a scribble school where he would spend years mastering the thousands of hieratic and hieroglyphic signs. He practiced on flakes of limestone or broken pottery, learning to form the elegant, flowing characters with a reed brush, grinding his own ink from soot and gum. This education wasn't just about memorizing symbols. It was about absorbing the entire cultural and literary tradition of Egypt, from administrative formulae to religious hymns and, as we see, the art of poetry. The scribe was the guardian of language itself, equipped with the tools to give any thought, any feeling, a tangible and lasting form. This deep training leads us to one of the most fascinating ambiguities surrounding the love poems. Were these scribes passively transcribing works that were already popular, or were they the original composers themselves? The evidence suggests a beautifully complex reality, one where the line between archivist and artist was wonderfully blurred. On one hand, the poems have a certain formulaic quality, using traditional metaphors and repeating refrains that feel rooted in a long-standing oral tradition. It is entirely plausible that a scribe might have heard a particularly beautiful song at a festival or a private gathering, a song sung by a woman while grinding grain, or a chant recited by laborers in the field, and been so moved by it that he later wrote it down, polishing its language and structuring it into a more formal verse. In this role, he was a folklorist capturing the living, breathing voice of his people. On the other hand, the incredible sophistication and consistency of voice across different papyri also point to the work of highly skilled literary artists. A scribe steeped in the classics of his culture and possessing a masterful command of language was perfectly positioned to compose original works. He could take a universal feeling, the ache of longing, the joy of a compliment, and clothe it in the most exquisite imagery his education could provide. He might be writing a poem to present to a loved one, a truly personal gift, or crafting a piece for a wealthy patron to be performed at a banquet. In this capacity, the scribe was a creative genius in his own right, using his technical skill to explore the landscape of human emotion. The very fact that we cannot easily distinguish between these two possibilities, folk song or original composition, is a testament to the scribe's skill. He was so adept at his craft that he could make a written poem feel as immediate and authentic as a spontaneous song, and a popular sentiment feel as fresh as if it were being felt for the very first time. This artistic license extended beyond mere composition into the very act of writing. Look closely at a hieratic papyrus and you see more than just words. You see a sense of style and personal flair. While the script had standard forms, individual scribes developed their own handwriting, their own slight variations in the way they formed certain signs. The layout of the text on the page, the use of red ink for titles or key phrases, these were all conscious aesthetic choices. The scribe was not a human printing press, he was a calligrapher, an editor, and a designer. He decided how to break the lines for rhythmic effect, where to place a pause for dramatic emphasis. In compiling an anthology like the Chester Beatty papyrus, a scribe was acting as a curator, selecting which poems belonged together, creating a narrative or emotional flow from one song to the next. This was a creative act of the highest order, shaping how future generations would experience and interpret this entire genre of literature. Ultimately, viewing the scribe as a key cultural figure completely transforms our understanding of these works. He was not a neutral channel but an active participant in the culture of love. He gave the intangible a body, the whispered word a lasting voice. His work ensured that the playful teasing between two lovers, the secret plan to meet in the stables, and the profound comparison of a beloved to a field of offerings would not vanish with the morning mist. He safeguarded these intimate moments with the same meticulous care he would apply to a royal decree or a religious text, elevating the personal to the level of the historic. In doing so, the scribe performed his most vital role. He proved that the ancient Egyptians believed the human heart was as worthy of preservation as the names of pharaohs and the rituals of the gods. Through his skilled hand, the most fragile of human experiences, love, was granted a form of immortality, allowing us 3,000 years later to not just read about their emotions, but to feel them intimately and directly, as if the scribe had dipped his brush in the very ink of the heart. This direct and unflinching celebration of the body extends far beyond mere admiration, venturing into a realm of explicit sensuality that can feel startlingly modern. The ancient Egyptian poets did not cloak physical intimacy in vague or flowery euphemisms. They described it with a joyful, celebratory frankness that reveals a culture completely at ease with the human body and its pleasures. They understood that love was not just a meeting of minds or hearts, but a profoundly physical union, and they gave that union a voice with an honesty that can still make us blink in recognition. Consider a passage from the Chester Beatty papyrus where a young woman speaks of her longing for her absent lover. She doesn't just miss his conversation or his smile, she confesses a specific physical craving. The poem reads, "I remember my beloved with his hand upon my body, and the trembling that seizes me because of it." The specificity is breathtaking. It's not a generalized memory of affection, but a vivid, tactile recollection of a specific touch and the involuntary, electric physical response it triggered. This is a level of intimate detail that feels ripped from a private diary, not composed for public performance, yet there it is, inscribed for eternity. This comfort with physicality is woven throughout the poems in ways that are both tender and boldly direct. In another verse, a young man describes his beloved's body with the same reverence an artist might use for a sacred statue, but the description is far from chaste. He says, "Her breasts are like ripe mandrakes, a fruit associated with love and fertility," and continues, "Her embrace is like the field of offerings." That phrase, the field of offerings, operates on multiple levels. On one hand, it is deeply sacred, comparing the act of holding her to a temple altar where gifts are presented to the gods, sanctifying their intimacy. On the other hand, it is unmistakably physical and fertile, a metaphor for a place of nourishment, sustenance, and profound generosity. The poets frequently used the imagery of gardens, orchards, and fertile fields not just as backdrops for romance, but as direct metaphors for the female body and the act of love itself. A woman might be called an orchard of pomegranates, her body seen as a source of sweet, life-giving fruit. This seamless blending of the sacred, the natural, and the erotic is a hallmark of the Egyptian worldview, where these concepts were not in conflict but were intertwined aspects of a single, life-affirming reality. Perhaps the most striking evidence of this sexual frankness comes from the so-called Turin erotic papyrus, a document that is less a collection of poems and more a vivid visual and textual narrative. While much of its content is pictorial, the accompanying text and the overall theme leave little to the imagination. It depicts couples engaged in various acts of lovemaking with a humorous, playful, and utterly unashamed realism. In one section, a woman is depicted with a giant lotus blossom, a classic symbol of rebirth and sensuality, in an overtly suggestive manner. The context makes it clear that this is not religious allegory. It is a celebration of sexual pleasure for its own sake. This papyrus was not hidden away as forbidden contraband. It was a piece of entertainment likely created for a wealthy patron. Its very existence, alongside the more lyrical love poems, proves that ancient Egyptian society had a space for open, humorous, and direct depictions of sexuality. They did not relegate it to the shadows or treat it as a taboo subject, but acknowledged it as a natural, enjoyable, and integral part of human life. This refreshing lack of prudery stands in stark contrast to the stereotypes often imposed on ancient civilizations. We often project our own modern hang-ups onto the past, imagining our ancestors as more restrained, more formal, or more proper. The Egyptian love poems shatter that illusion completely. They show us a people who were, in many ways, more psychologically healthy in their attitude toward the body than many cultures that followed. There was no concept of sin attached to physical pleasure in the way that would later develop in some other traditions. Instead, pleasure was seen as a gift from the gods, particularly from Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and ecstasy. To enjoy the body was to honor her. This cultural permission allowed for a remarkable equality in the expression of desire. As we've seen, the female voice in these poems is just as frank and physical as the male. A woman could openly speak of her yearning for her lover's touch, of the pleasure she found in his body, and of her own active role in their intimacy without any sense of shame or impropriety. This mutual, expressed desire was considered a normal and beautiful part of a relationship. Ultimately, this physical candor in the poetry is not crude or vulgar. It is an affirmation of life itself. In a world where disease, famine, and early death were constant presences, the joys of the body were to be seized and celebrated. The intense sensory descriptions, the taste of pomegranate wine, the scent of myrrh on skin, the feel of a lover's hand, are all testaments to a philosophy that valued lived experience. The poems do not separate love into spiritual and physical components. They present them as a unified whole. The act of physical love was as much a part of the sacred order as a prayer in the temple, because it was through such acts that life was created, sustained, and filled with happiness. This holistic view allowed for a complete and honest expression of human relationships, giving us a priceless record of a people who embraced the full spectrum of love, from the flutter of the heart to the touch of a hand, with a wisdom and a warmth that feels both ancient and utterly timeless. Now, to truly understand the genius of these poets, we need to become translators not just of language but of imagination. We need to decode the rich symbolic world they inhabited, where a single, carefully chosen word could unlock a universe of meaning. Their metaphors weren't just decorative flourishes, they were the very architecture of thought built from the materials of their daily lives, their environment, and their spiritual beliefs. Let's take one of the most intriguing and, to modern ears, perhaps unexpected comparisons, the beloved being called a horse. In one poem, a young man praises his love, declaring, "My sister is a prize mare of the finest steeds." At first glance, this might seem strange, even unromantic, but in the context of New Kingdom Egypt, this was one of the highest compliments imaginable. Horses were relatively new, prestigious imports associated with the pharaoh's military might, chariotry, and immense wealth. They were symbols of power, grace, speed, and unparalleled beauty. To compare a woman to a prize mare was to say she was the very best of her kind, a creature of supreme value, elegance, and strength. It placed her in the realm of the elite and the powerful, suggesting she possessed a noble, spirited energy that was both admired and desired. This metaphor reveals a cultural mindset that valued dynamism and vitality in a partner, appreciating not just passive beauty but active, powerful presence. This intricate web of symbolism extends to the very core of emotional experience, the human heart. The Egyptians didn't just have a simple word for love. They described its effects with startlingly vivid metaphors that have since traveled across continents and millennia. One of the most enduring is the concept of the heart being stolen. A poet laments, "She has stolen my heart with her embrace," a phrase that feels so familiar to us today we barely consider its origin. But in the Egyptian worldview, this was a deeply significant statement. The heart, or ib, was not just the seat of emotion. It was the center of a person's intellect, memory, and moral core. It was the one organ left in the body during mummification because it would be weighed against the feather of truth in the afterlife. For your heart to be stolen was therefore a cataclysmic event. It meant your very identity, your conscience, and your will had been taken over by another person. This wasn't a mild infatuation, it was a complete and total capitulation of the self. The metaphor captures the feeling of helplessness and overwhelming passion with a precision that pure description could never achieve, grounding a universal feeling in a specific, profound cultural belief. The poets constantly reached for the natural world to articulate these inner storms, and one of their most potent symbols was the sycamore fig tree. This wasn't just any tree, it was a sacred entity, often associated with the goddesses Hathor and Nut, who were sometimes depicted as sycamores offering shade and sustenance to the souls of the dead. When a lover says, "I am like a sycamore tree and my beloved sits in my shade," the imagery is incredibly rich. The tree represents the speaker as a source of protection, nourishment, and life-giving comfort. The beloved sitting in its shade is someone who is cherished, sheltered, and provided for. This metaphor transforms a simple feeling of care into a divine act, linking the protective nature of love to the tree's sacred role in the afterlife. It's a beautiful example of how the Egyptians seamlessly wove the spiritual and the sensual into a single, powerful image, where providing comfort for a lover echoes the goddess's comfort for the deceased. Even the animal kingdom provided a nuanced symbolic language for the complexities of romance. We've already seen the heart compared to a trapped bird fluttering in panic. But consider the more positive role of birds like swallows and doves. Their migratory patterns, their gentle cooing, and their graceful flight made them perfect symbols for messages, longing, and the soul itself. A line like, "The voice of the swallow speaks, it says, 'Dawn has come, where will you go?' uses the bird not just as a herald of the morning, but as the voice of the poet's own conscience or anxiety, questioning the return to the mundane world after a night of intimacy. In another poem, a lover wishes to be transformed into a seal ring, a small personal item their beloved would wear on their hand every day. This is a metaphor for the desire for constant, intimate proximity, to be so close to the loved one that you become a part of their daily actions and their very identity. It's a deeply personal and creative expression of devotion that moves beyond the grand natural symbols to something small, tangible, and profoundly intimate. What this all reveals is a literary tradition of immense sophistication. These weren't simple, straightforward comparisons. They were layered, multifaceted images designed to be unpacked and pondered. A single metaphor could operate on a literal level, a spiritual level, and a cultural level all at once. To call a beloved's hair lapis lazuli was to comment on its color, its preciousness, and its connection to the divine realm of Hathor simultaneously. This complexity tells us that the audience for these poems was expected to be literate, culturally aware, and capable of appreciating this subtle interplay of meanings. The act of listening to or reading these poems was an interactive experience, a kind of intellectual and emotional puzzle where the listener's own knowledge of their world, the value of a horse, the sacredness of a tree, the power of the heart, was required to complete the full emotional picture the poet was painting. It was a shared cultural code that made the expression of love not just a personal confession, but a collaborative act of artistic and intellectual recognition between the poet and their audience. But this incredible window into the ancient heart comes with a sobering reality check. The poems we can read today represent only the tiniest, most fortunate fraction of a once vibrant literary world. For every exquisite verse that survived, thousands upon thousands of others have vanished back into the silence of time, leaving us with mere glimpses of a lost continent of emotion. The primary medium for this literature, papyrus, was both a marvel of its time and incredibly vulnerable. Made from the pith of the papyrus plant pressed into sheets, it was a practical and relatively accessible writing surface, but its organic nature made it perishable in the extreme. In any environment other than the bone-dry, rainless climate of the Egyptian desert, papyrus is a feast for mold, insects, and decay. A single season of dampness, a Nile flood that breached a storage room, or simply the slow, steady absorption of humidity from the air over centuries could reduce a priceless poetic anthology to a dark, unreadable pulp. its ink faded and its fibers fused together into an indiscernible lump. This natural fragility was compounded by human activity, sometimes tragically deliberate. Papyrus was a valuable commodity, and a sheet that contained a beautiful but perhaps outdated love poem could be seen as a blank canvas for something more immediately useful. There is evidence that old papyri were sometimes reused, with a scribe writing a new administrative record or a business letter directly over the faded original text, creating what is known as a palimpsest. In these cases, the love poem was literally erased by practicality, its intimate whispers silenced beneath the dry accounting of grain supplies or tax records. Worse still, there are accounts from the early days of Egyptology, a less scientifically rigorous time, where intact rolls of papyrus were sometimes used as kindling by local workers or were carelessly handled and disintegrated in the hands of overeager collectors before they could be properly conserved. Each of these lost manuscripts wasn't just a document, it was a unique collection of voices, a curated selection of feelings that reflected the taste of one individual or one community, now gone forever. This profound loss forces us to recontextualize our entire understanding of the genre. The Chester Beatty and Turin papyri are not the rule, they are the breathtaking exception. Their survival is a story of a perfect 1,000,000-to-1 alignment of luck. They had to be discarded or stored in just the right trash heap or tomb shaft in just the right location, a place that remained perfectly dry and undisturbed not just for centuries but for millennia. They had to avoid the attention of insects and rodents. They had to remain hidden from tomb robbers who might have torn them apart looking for gold, and from later settlers who might have cleared the area. The fact that any of them endured at all is a minor miracle of preservation, a gift from the unique environmental conditions of the Egyptian desert that acted as a perfect time capsule. This realization makes the poems we do have feel infinitely more precious. They are not random survivors, they are the lucky lottery winners of history, the few voices that managed to shout across a chasm of 30 centuries while countless others were utterly erased. When we hold up these few precious scrolls as representative of New Kingdom love poetry, it's like trying to understand the entire diverse landscape of modern popular music by listening to just 3 or 4 randomly saved songs from a vast and vanished library. We have lost the regional variations, the works of the true literary genius whose name is forgotten, the entire early evolution of the form, and the popular, simple folk songs that might have been sung in the fields. The collections we possess undoubtedly reflect the tastes of a specific, educated, elite segment of society, primarily from the Theban area and the village of Deir el-Medina. What of the love poetry from the bustling Delta region in the north with its different cultural influences? What verses were composed in the royal court at Memphis? We will simply never know. This inherent bias in the historical record is a constant, humbling reminder for scholars. We are not looking at a complete picture, but through a handful of tiny, brilliantly lit keyholes, and we must be careful not to mistake the vivid scene we see through one for the entirety of the view. And so, every time we read a line like, "My heart is like a trapped bird," we are engaging in a kind of scholarly archaeology of the absent. We are appreciating not only the beautiful sentiment that is present, but also feeling the ghostly weight of all the other beautiful sentiments that are missing. This awareness should not diminish our enjoyment, but rather deepen it. The survival of these works is a defiant stand against the inevitable entropy of time. It means that someone 3,000 years ago felt an emotion so powerfully that they needed to give it form. A scribe then valued that emotion enough to meticulously capture it in ink. And then, through a cascade of random luck and perfect desert air, that physical record endured long enough for us to find it, translate it, and feel the echo of that same emotion in our own hearts today. The poems are therefore more than literature. They are a testament to the stubborn resilience of human feeling, a message in a bottle that, against all conceivable odds, actually managed to wash up on the shore of our modern world. Haven't you ever felt a sudden, inexplicable lift in your spirit at the mere thought of someone special? A sensation so potent it feels almost like an intoxicant. That's the exact same thrill the ancient Egyptian poet captured when he wrote that the sight of his beloved was like pomegranate wine. Or consider the restless, anxious feeling of waiting for a text message to arrive, the way your focus shatters and you can't settle into any task. That's the modern echo of the 3,000-year-old lament. I am like a field that has been stripped, a soul depleted by longing. It can no longer function in its daily life. This is the true, breathtaking power of these poems. They are not artifacts locked in a museum case. They are living documents of the human heart, and they prove with startling clarity that the core emotional firmware of humanity has not required an update in over 30 centuries. The technology, the culture, the entire world has transformed beyond recognition, but the fundamental experience of love, with its dizzying highs, its agonizing lows, and its quiet, comforting intimacies remains eerily, beautifully the same. Think about the modern love song blasting through your headphones, with its lyrics about a heart beating out of its chest or being completely captivated by someone. Now listen to the ancient Egyptian verse, "My heart is not still in my body like a trapped bird in a net." The imagery is different, rooted in a world of nets and wild birds rather than modern medicine, but the physiological truth it describes is identical. The poet is naming the same visceral, uncontrollable bodily reaction to desire that a songwriter describes today, or consider the universal pain of separation. When a contemporary poet writes of an empty space in the bed that feels like a canyon, they are walking the same emotional ground as the Egyptian who declared, "I am like a man in the underworld when his love is distant from him." Both use the most extreme metaphor available to them, one using the imagery of death and the afterlife, the other perhaps using cosmic emptiness, to convey a feeling that is fundamentally identical, the profound sense of incompleteness and shadow life that comes from the absence of the one you love. These parallels are not coincidental, they are evidence of a shared human emotional language. What these poems ultimately dismantle is the arrogant notion that our modern understanding of love is more sophisticated or profound than that of our ancient ancestors. We have psychology and neuroscience to explain the chemical reactions of attraction and attachment, but the Egyptians had something just as powerful, a poetic and spiritual framework that allowed them to articulate those very same feelings with a clarity and beauty that remains unmatched. They didn't need the word dopamine to describe the giddy high of new love. They had the metaphor of intoxicating wine. They didn't have the concept of anxiety to explain the nervous anticipation of seeing a lover. They had the perfectly captured image of a fluttering, trapped bird. Their expressions are not primitive, they are pristine. They cut directly to the core of the feeling, bypassing clinical terminology and striking right at the raw nerve of universal experience. This is why they resonate so deeply. They remind us that our most personal and private emotions are, in fact, part of a grand, shared human story. This connection also challenges the artificial barriers we often erect between different civilizations and eras, creating a profound bridge of empathy across time. When you read the clever, teasing dialogue from the Turin papyrus, where the young woman directs her suitor to meet her in the stable to avoid gossip, you are no longer looking at a hieroglyphic figure on a tomb wall. You are recognizing a person. You understand her calculation, her desire to balance passion with social propriety, her quick wit in solving a logistical problem for her heart. She becomes real. The young man, paralyzed by fear of what the neighbors will say, is instantly familiar. He is every person who has ever nervously glanced around before holding a lover's hand in public for the first time. This is the magic of these texts. They perform a sort of emotional time travel. They collapse the immense gulf of millennia into an intimate moment of recognition, where the concerns of a teenage couple in Thebes in 1250 BC feel as immediate and relatable as the concerns of a couple today. They show us that while the stage sets and costumes of life have changed, the central dramas of the human heart, the scripts of love, fear, joy, and longing are perennial. So the next time you feel that familiar, frantic flutter in your chest, or the sweet agony of waiting for a reunion, or the simple, profound comfort of a loved one's presence, remember that you are participating in a ritual as old as civilization itself. You are feeling what a gold worker in Deir el-Medina felt as he composed a verse for his wife, what a noble woman felt as she listened to a song performed in her garden, what a young scribe felt as he carefully inked his longing onto a sheet of papyrus. These poems are our most powerful rebuttal to the silence of the pyramids and the stoic faces of the statues. They are the definitive proof that the ancient Egyptians were not a people morbidly obsessed with death, but a culture passionately, vibrantly, and eloquently in love with life. They treasured the human connection, the thrill of attraction, and the comfort of companionship, and they had the wisdom and the artistry to preserve those feelings in ink, gifting us with the profound and comforting truth that in the great, sprawling story of humanity, a heart in love has always sounded exactly the same. Now, as we stand in awe of these beautifully preserved voices, a tantalizing question arises. Did their echo simply fade into the desert air, or did it travel, subtly shaping the artistic traditions that followed? While we may never find a papyrus scroll in a Roman villa explicitly citing an Egyptian precursor, the thematic and emotional parallels between these ancient love songs and later Greco-Roman poetry are simply too striking to be mere coincidence. Consider the journey of goods and ideas along the bustling trade routes of the ancient Mediterranean. Egyptian gold, grain, and linens were highly prized across the sea, and with these material goods traveled cultural concepts, artistic styles, and perhaps, tucked away in the minds of merchants and diplomats, the memory of a haunting verse or a clever poetic structure. The city of Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC, became the ultimate cultural melting pot, a Greek-speaking capital on Egyptian soil where the Great Library aimed to collect all the world's knowledge. It is almost inconceivable that the vibrant literary traditions of the land they now inhabited would not have permeated the intellectual atmosphere, influencing the Greek and later Roman poets who lived, worked, and were educated there. When we place a poem by the Roman elegist Catullus next to an Egyptian verse, the resonance is uncanny. Catullus writes of his beloved Lesbia, "Give me 1,000 kisses, then 100, a playful, obsessive enumeration of affection." This directly mirrors the Egyptian poetic device of using numbers to express infinite devotion, as seen in a line like, "I love you more than 7,000 garments." Both poets use the tangible kisses, garments, to quantify an intangible, overwhelming emotion. Similarly, the Egyptian poet's declaration, "My heart is not still in my body," finds its clear descendant in Sappho's famous physical description of desire, "A subtle fire runs under my skin." Both traditions share a fundamental understanding of love, not as a purely cerebral experience, but as a force that manifests in visceral, bodily reactions. This shared focus on the physiological impact of love suggests a possible continuity of thought, a poetic understanding of human psychology that may have been transmitted, even indirectly, from the banks of the Nile to the forums of Rome. The thematic parallels extend beyond mere physical sensation into the very structure of desire. The Egyptian motif of the Paraklosithyron, the poem where a locked-out lover laments at his beloved's door, becomes a standard trope in Roman elegy. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Amores, paints a vivid picture of himself standing in the rain, begging the unfeeling door to open. This is a direct dramatic descendant of the young man in the Turin papyrus, hesitating at his lover's door, paralyzed by fear of the watching neighbors. The social context is different. The Roman poem is often more comedic, and the lover more explicitly excluded, but the core narrative of the thwarted lover addressing an inanimate barrier is structurally identical. Another profound shared theme is the use of nature as a mirror for inner turmoil. the Egyptian poet's heart is a trapped bird or a stripped field. Centuries later, the Roman poet Virgil, in his Eclogues, has a shepherd lament that his love makes the forests and mountains echo his grief, projecting his emotional state onto the landscape in a way the Egyptians would have understood perfectly. This pathetic fallacy, this blurring of the line between the human soul and the natural world, seems to be a foundational layer of poetic expression that the Egyptians perfected and that later writers naturally adopted and adapted. Yet, why is this profound connection so often overlooked in the grand narrative of literary history? The answer lies in the nature of cultural transmission and academic tradition. The great classical scholars of the 18th and 19th centuries who first structured our understanding of Western literature were primarily Hellenists and Latinists. Their gaze was fixed firmly on Greece and Rome as the pure founts of Western civilization. Egypt was often categorized as an exotic, mysterious, but ultimately separate Oriental civilization, its contributions largely confined to architecture, religion, and monarchy. Its sophisticated literary tradition, especially its secular love poetry, was not fully rediscovered and translated until the early 20th century, long after the canon of classical influence had been firmly established. Furthermore, the language barrier was immense. While educated Europeans had been reading Homer and Virgil in the original for centuries, the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs was only achieved in the 1820s, and the fluent reading of literary texts like the love poems took even longer to master. By the time these voices were finally heard, the story of literature's evolution had already been written, and it was a story that largely skipped from Mesopotamia to Greece, barely pausing in Egypt. This historical oversight demands correction. We should position Egyptian love poetry not as a curious dead end, but as a foundational, pioneering chapter in world literature. These poems represent one of humanity's very first forays into exploring the interior landscape of romantic love in a structured, artistic form. They established a toolkit of metaphors: the heart as a captive creature, the beloved as a divine being, nature as an emotional barometer, that would become the stock in trade of poets for millennia. Before the Greek lyricists, before the Roman elegists, the scribes of Deir el-Medina were already crafting dialogues between lovers, celebrating the female voice, and wrestling with the social complications of desire. They were the true innovators of the love lyric. Recognizing this doesn't diminish the achievements of Sappho or Catullus. Instead, it places them in a much longer and richer tradition. It suggests that the flowering of love poetry in the classical world was not a spontaneous generation, but may well have been the culmination of centuries of artistic cross-pollination. The Egyptian love poems thus claim their rightful place not in a secluded niche of Egyptology, but at the very heart of the human story of artistic expression, a quiet, powerful, and deeply influential current that has been flowing beneath the surface of world literature all along. And so, we arrive at a thrilling question that hangs in the air, as tangible as the dust in an archaeologist's sieve. Are there more of these voices waiting for us? The answer is an electrifying, almost certain yes. The search for these intimate whispers from the past is far from over. In fact, it is entering one of the most exciting phases in the entire history of Egyptology. The possibility of discovering new love poems exists in two equally promising frontiers: the undiscovered sites still buried beneath the desert sands, and the vast, often overlooked collections of papyri that have been sitting in museum basements around the world for over a century. Think of the legendary Valley of the Kings, which we often assume has been picked clean. Modern surveys using ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing technologies continue to reveal anomalies and potential undiscovered chambers. While a royal tomb might be the grand prize, the real treasure for texts could lie in the lesser-known tombs of officials or the trash heaps of other workmen's villages like Deir el-Medina. These middens, these ancient garbage dumps, were where the Chester Beatty papyrus was ultimately found. They are not glamorous, but they are time capsules of daily life, and it is in these unassuming contexts that the most personal documents, those not deemed important enough for burial, were discarded and preserved. Every digging season in Egypt holds the potential for a workman to brush away the sand and reveal the corner of a linen-wrapped papyrus bundle, a package containing not a mummy but a heart preserved in ink. But perhaps the most immediate and promising frontier isn't in the field at all. It's in the climate-controlled storage rooms of museums in Cairo, London, Berlin, and New York. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the era of treasure-hunting archaeology, countless papyri were excavated and shipped back to institutions in crates. These collections are so vast that many fragments have never been properly studied, simply because there haven't been enough scholars and enough hours in the day to examine every single piece. A fragment might be catalogued vaguely as literary text or hieratic papyrus fragment, its true contents remaining a mystery, folded and tucked away in a drawer for decades. It is entirely conceivable that within these storage cabinets lie broken pieces of love poems, misidentified or waiting for a curious expert to piece them together like an ancient jigsaw puzzle. This is where modern technology performs what can only be described as pure magic. One of the most revolutionary tools is multispectral imaging. This process involves photographing a papyrus fragment under different wavelengths of light, from infrared to ultraviolet. A sheet that appears blank or hopelessly stained to the naked eye can suddenly reveal itself under infrared light, the carbon-based ink used by the ancient scribes absorbing the light and standing out in stark contrast against the lighter papyrus fibers. It's like applying a filter that makes the invisible visible. This technology has already breathed new life into fragments of the works of the Greek poet Archaeologists and has clarified damaged passages in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There is no reason it cannot unlock a completely unknown Egyptian love poem from a fragment long since written off as a lost cause. Other advanced techniques are equally promising. Digital unwrapping software allows scholars to create a 3D scan of a still rolled or crumpled papyrus. The software can then virtually unroll it on a screen, allowing the text to be read without ever physically touching the fragile object, which could cause it to crumble to dust. Chemical analysis of inks can also help. Sometimes a scribe would use an ink that has faded to the point of being invisible, but traces of its metallic or organic components remain embedded in the papyrus. X-ray fluorescence can detect these elemental residues, mapping out the ghost of the text that has vanished from sight. These are not speculative technologies. They are actively being used right now in projects around the world, and they are turning what was once considered ephemeral and lost into a tangible, readable reality. Every time a new fragment is identified, it's not just adding another poem to a list. It has the potential to fundamentally shift our understanding. A single new poem could introduce us to a previously unknown poetic structure, reveal a new metaphor for love, or most excitingly, give us the name of a specific poet, moving us from the anonymity of a collective tradition to the singular voice of an individual artist. This ongoing work is a powerful testament to the fact that our understanding of the past is not a static, completed picture. It is a living, breathing narrative that is constantly being revised and enriched. The discovery of even one new love poem would be a monumental event. It would be like finding a new room in a house you thought you knew completely, a room filled with fresh voices and new stories to tell. Each new line of verse recovered from the darkness is a direct challenge to the silence of time, a reaffirmation of the enduring power of human emotion. The archaeologists and philologists working in dusty trenches and quiet laboratories are not just uncovering history. They are acting as midwives for these ancient voices, helping them to speak once more, ensuring that the conversation between the past and the present never truly ends. Let's bring all of this to life by focusing on one complete poem, a perfect jewel from the Chester Beatty papyrus. By sitting with a single work, we can truly hear its music and understand the craft behind these ancient emotions. Here is a modern translation of a poem spoken from a young woman's perspective. 7 days since I saw my sister, and sickness has crept over me. My limbs have become heavy, I am forgetful of my own body. If the chief physicians come to me, my heart has no comfort from their remedies. The priests, they have no answers, my sickness will not be diagnosed. To tell me she is here is what will revive me. Her name is what will lift me up. The coming and going of her messengers, that is what will restore my heart. My sister is more to me than any prescriptions. She is more to me than the entire compendium of healing. My health is her coming in from outside. When I see her, then I am well. When she opens her eyes, my body is young again. When she speaks, I am strong. When I embrace her, she banishes evil from me, but she has been gone for 7 days. Now let's walk through this masterpiece line by line. 7 days since I saw my sister, and sickness has crept over me. The poem opens not with a vague sadness, but with a specific, measurable unit of time. In a culture without clocks or constant communication, 7 days would have felt like an eternity, establishing a profound sense of absence from the very first breath. The word sister here, as we know, is a term of deep endearment for a lover, instantly framing this as an intimate relationship. And notice the verb, sickness has crept over me. This isn't a sudden illness, it's a slow, insidious possession of her body by the absence of her beloved. She is being consumed from the inside out. She continues, my limbs have become heavy, I am forgetful of my own body. This is a breathtakingly modern description of depression or profound grief. The heaviness is a physical weight, a paralysis born of despair, but the second part is even more insightful, forgetful of my own body. This suggests a complete disassociation. Her sense of self is so tied to her lover that without that reflection, her own physical form becomes unfamiliar, a strange and burdensome shell. This is a far more sophisticated psychological observation than we might expect, moving beyond a simple stomach flutter to a deep existential confusion. Then she systematically dismisses the entire medical and spiritual establishment of her time. If the chief physicians come to me, my heart has no comfort from their remedies. The priests, they have no answers, my sickness will not be diagnosed. In a society renowned for its medical knowledge and powerful priesthood, this is a radical statement. She is declaring that her condition is beyond the reach of worldly science and divine intervention. It places love in a category all its own, a force that conventional wisdom cannot comprehend or cure. The heart here is the key. The physicians treat the body, but her illness is in the seat of her emotion and identity, a place their medicines cannot touch. Her self-diagnosis is swift and certain. To tell me she is here is what will revive me. Her name is what will lift me up. This is the turning point. The cure is not a potion, but a presence. The mere utterance of her lover's name is assigned talismanic power, capable of lifting the physical weight from her limbs. This directly echoes the belief we discussed earlier, where a name held the essence of a person's being. To speak the name is to summon the person, and thus to summon life back into her own body. She adds, the coming and going of her messengers, that is what will restore my heart. Even the faintest connection, a servant carrying a note, a friend relaying a greeting, is enough to provide a temporary heartbeat. This shows how she clings to the smallest evidence of the relationship, where the mere traffic of communication becomes a lifeline. The next comparison is one of the most powerful in all of Egyptian literature. My sister is more to me than any prescriptions. She is more to me than the entire compendium of healing. The compendium of healing likely refers to a specific, revered medical text, the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian science. To say her lover is worth more than this is to reject the foundation of empirical knowledge in favor of emotional truth. It is a declaration that love is the ultimate medicine, a concept that feels incredibly contemporary. She is the walking, talking antidote to all that ails the world. The poem then builds to its climax with a series of rapid-fire declarations of healing. My health is her coming in from outside. When I see her, then I am well. When she opens her eyes, my body is young again. When she speaks, I am strong. Each line escalates the restorative power. Her mere arrival is health. The act of seeing her is a cure. The moment her lover's eyes open, it reverses time itself, making the speaker's body young again. This isn't just about feeling better, it's about rejuvenation, a return to a state of innocence and vitality. The sound of her voice provides strength, a direct counter to the heaviness described at the poem's start. And then the final, beautiful, and almost ritualistic line. When I embrace her, she banishes evil from me. The word evil here is potent. In an Egyptian context, this could refer to everything from minor maladies to actual demonic forces believed to cause sickness. The embrace of her lover is not just comforting, it is a sacred act of purification. It has the power to drive out all that is dark and harmful from her very being. This single line connects human intimacy directly to the realm of magic and divine protection, framing the beloved as both healer and exorcist. The poem concludes by snapping us back to the harsh reality that began it, a masterful use of circular structure. But she has been gone for 7 days. That single dash, that pause, is heartbreaking. After building this incredible vision of healing and wholeness, we are wrenched back to the present, to the ongoing 7-day agony. This final line ensures the poem doesn't end on a note of fantasy, but on the raw, unresolved ache of the present moment. It leaves the speaker and us suspended in that longing, making the emotion feel immediate, real, and utterly unforgettable. Through this one poem, we see it all: the physicality of emotion, the failure of institution, the power of the name, and the sacred, healing magic of love itself. So as we reach the end of our journey, what are the fundamental truths that these astonishingly preserved whispers have revealed? We began with a civilization often viewed through a lens of stone and silence, and we discovered a people who cherished romantic love with a passion and sophistication that rivals our own. They celebrated physical beauty not with crude objectification, but with a reverent, artistic eye, comparing their beloveds to the most precious materials in their world: gold, lapis lazuli, and the sacred lotus. They expressed the full spectrum of emotion, from the dizzying heights of joy to the agonizing depths of longing, with a psychological depth and poetic skill that feels both ancient and utterly contemporary. And perhaps most beautifully, they saw no hard barrier between the human and the divine, finding the sacred in a lover's embrace and hearing the echo of the gods in a beloved's voice. These poems do more than just add a charming footnote to history. They fundamentally shatter the cold, stoic, monolithic image of ancient Egypt, replacing it with a vision of a culture that was vibrant, emotionally intelligent, and deeply in love with life itself. This realization brings us to a powerful and closing thought, one that transcends archaeology and speaks to the very core of our shared humanity. Love, in all its forms, is humanity's oldest and most enduring language. Long before empires rose, before the great philosophies were written, human hearts were beating with the same rhythm of attraction, affection, and devotion that we know today. These Egyptian poems are not relics, they are proof. They are a testament to a universal emotional experience that connects us directly to a young scribe in Thebes, to a witty young woman in Deir el-Medina, to every person who has ever tried to capture the inexpressible feeling of love in words. The specific metaphors may change. We no longer compare our hearts to trapped birds or our beloveds to prize mares, but the essential feeling, the raw, beautiful, and sometimes painful truth of being in love, remains a constant thread woven through the entire tapestry of human history. And so, we pass the conversation to you. We have listened to the voices from the Nile. Now we would love to hear yours. In the comments below, share your favorite love poem. It can be an ancient verse from another culture that moves you, a line from a modern song that captures a feeling perfectly, or perhaps even a few words of your own that you've written for someone special. Let's continue this celebration of love's eternal language, connecting our own stories to the timeless human story that began thousands of years ago along the banks of the Nile. Thank you for listening.